Let me tell you a secret the world doesn't want you to know. Every rule about how to succeed is a lie carefully crafted to keep you in your place. The degree they told you was non-negotiable? A crumbling relic of the past. The experience requirements that made you feel unqualified? An illusion designed to filter out the fearless. The perfect background you thought you needed? A myth that's stolen more potential than every economic recession combined. This book exists because I'm tired of watching extraordinary people like you, waste years begging for permission to be great. I wrote it for the late-night Google searchers wondering if they've missed their chance. For the overlooked talents sitting through another soul-crushing meeting. For the quietly determined who just need someone to say what no one else will. The game is rigged, but the back door has been left wide open. What you hold in your hands is not inspiration. It's intellectual ammunition. Between these pages, you'll find the forbidden knowledge of modern success. How high school dropouts are quietly out-earning PhDs. How unqualified outsiders are rewriting industry rules. How ordinary people are exploiting the system's blind spots to claim extraordinary lives. These aren't motivational stories. They're tactical blueprints distilled from neuroscience research, pattern studies of underdog winners, and the unspoken strategies of those who've cracked the code. This book will hurt. It will force you to confront the uncomfortable truth that your excuses, valid as they feel, are the only things truly holding you back. It will demand you trade comforting lies for uncomfortable truths. But if you're willing to see yourself not as a victim of circumstance but as a strategist in hiding, it will give you something priceless. The operating manual for a life beyond society's imagination. The education you're about to receive has no campus, no tuition, and no multiple choice tests. Just raw, unfiltered truth about how the world really works, and exactly how to claim your place at the top of it. Your future self is watching. What happens next is your decision. Chapter 1. You don't need a degree to be great. What if everything you've been told about success is wrong? What if the secret to becoming the best in the world has nothing to do with classrooms, exams, or diplomas, and everything to do with what you do with your curiosity, grit, and willingness to learn outside the system? This chapter is about shattering the biggest myth holding people back. The idea that you need a college degree to succeed. The truth is, the world's most influential innovators, from Steve Jobs to Kylie Jenner, didn't rely on formal education to build empires. Instead, they mastered skills that mattered, leveraged free resources like the internet, and ignored the rules that limit ordinary people. Take James West, a janitor at Bell Labs who, despite having no advanced degree, invented the electret microphone now found in every smartphone. Or David Karp, who dropped out of high school at 15 and created Tumblr. Their stories prove that success isn't about credentials. It's about solving real problems, learning relentlessly, and refusing to wait for permission. The internet has leveled the playing field. Today, a teenager in Nigeria can learn coding on YouTube and out-earn a Harvard graduate. Degrees might open doors, but they don't guarantee greatness, only action does. The key is to shift your mindset. Instead of asking, what degree do I need? Ask, what skill will make me indispensable? This chapter isn't just inspiration. It's a wake-up call. The world rewards those who create value, not those who follow outdated scripts. Your lack of a degree isn't a weakness. It's a hidden advantage, freeing you to learn faster, take risks, and rewrite the rules. The question isn't, can I succeed without college? But, what will I build with my freedom? Chapter 2. Find what makes you come alive. The most dangerous lie we tell young people is follow the safe path. Society pushes you toward predictable careers. Doctor, lawyer, engineer. Not because those are the only valuable paths, but because they're easy to measure. But what if your true calling doesn't come with a prepackaged job title? What if your greatest gift isn't something you can major in, but something you must discover through experimentation, failure, and relentless curiosity? This chapter isn't about finding a job. It's about uncovering the work that makes you lose track of time, the obsession that keeps you up at night, the problem you can't stop thinking about solving even when no one else sees its importance. Consider how Beyoncé didn't become Queen Bey by following a generic music curriculum. She honed an unmistakable voice by singing in her family's kitchen for years before anyone paid attention. Or how Elon Musk taught himself rocket science not through a degree, but by devouring Soviet-era physics manuals while running his first software company. These people didn't find success by coloring inside the lines. They found it by following their irrational, unshakable fascinations even when it seemed impractical. The process starts with self-interrogation. What did you love doing as a child before the world told you it was unrealistic? What topics do you research for fun when no one's watching? What menial task could you do for hours without getting bored? Your answers hold clues to your natural talents. Those abilities that feel so innate to you that you underestimate their rarity. A teenage boy who spends hours taking apart and rebuilding motorcycles might dismiss his mechanical intuition as just messing around, while a CEO would pay millions for that same instinct in an engineer. A girl who organizes her friends' wardrobes for fun might not realize she has the spatial reasoning of a world-class stylist. Society calls these hobbies until someone figures out how to monetize them. Then they're genius. The second step is recognizing that passion isn't enough. You need pairing. The most successful people combine 2 or 3 seemingly unrelated skills to create something no one else can replicate. A chef who understands chemistry invents revolutionary cooking techniques, like Ferran Adria of El Bulli. A programmer who studies psychology builds addictive yet humane apps, like Instagram's Kevin Systrom. The internet's greatest superpower is that it rewards these weird hybrids. You don't have to be the best in the world at one thing. You can be in the top 10% of 2 things and own the intersection. Maybe you're decent at graphic design and obsessed with medieval history. Could you illustrate historically accurate fantasy games? Perhaps you love gardening and TikTok. Could you become the go-to expert for urban farming hacks? This chapter will push you to conduct what author Scott Adams calls talent stack experiments. For the next 90 days, deliberately explore 3 fields that intrigue you, not to master them, but to test whether they spark that addictive flow state where hours feel like minutes. Track which subjects make you compulsively research deeper while others fizzle out. Pay attention to which skills people compliment you on that you dismiss as no big deal. Those are often your unfair advantages. The goal isn't to find your one true purpose, a myth that paralyzes more people than it helps, but to identify overlapping zones of competence, curiosity, and market demand. Real-world examples prove this works in unexpected ways. A dyslexic boy who struggled in school realized his brain was wired for 3D visualization. Now he's a 7-figure furniture designer. A cashier who made doodles on receipts built a following for her surreal art and now collaborates with major brands. Their paths weren't linear. They were puzzles where each piece, apparent failures, odd jobs, random skills, eventually connected. Your job isn't to have everything figured out now, but to start collecting those pieces with intention. By chapter's end, you'll have tools to audit your hidden strengths, reframe your weird interests as potential gold mines, and begin constructing a personal niche so distinct that no degree could ever compete with it. The future belongs to those who can answer 2 questions. What makes me come alive? And how can I make that matter to others? Everything else is noise. Chapter 3. Learn like a world changer. The greatest competitive advantage in our modern era isn't access to prestigious universities or expensive certifications. It's the ability to teach yourself complex skills at lightning speed, while others remain trapped in outdated educational systems. This chapter reveals the underground learning strategies used by self-made billionaires, polymaths, and industry disruptors who realized early that traditional education moves at the speed of bureaucracy, while real-world success demands learning at the speed of curiosity. Consider that while universities spend 4 years teaching theoretical business concepts, a motivated teenager today can access MIT's entire course catalog for free, analyze case studies of failed startups on Founders Podcast by age 16, and launch their first profitable venture before their peers even finish introductory economics. The playing field has been radically leveled. What separates the winners from the spectators now isn't pedigree, but their personal learning infrastructure. At the core of world-class self-education lies a counterintuitive truth. Structured classrooms often hinder true mastery because they prioritize memorization over application. The most effective learners treat knowledge like a professional chef treats ingredients. They don't just collect information, they immediately put it to work in real-world experiments. When Elon Musk wanted to understand rocket science, he didn't enroll in aerospace engineering. He formed what he called his library of mistakes, studying Soviet propulsion manuals while simultaneously building actual rocket components, failing spectacularly, and iterating based on tangible results. This learning by doing approach creates neural pathways that passive studying never could. Modern research confirms this. A study from the University of Chicago found that students who alternated between 30 minutes of study and 30 minutes of practical application retained 90% more material than those who crammed for hours. The most dangerous myth about learning is the idea that you must progress sequentially from beginner to expert. World changers practice what learning scientist Barbara Oakley calls targeted immersion. They identify the specific skill that will give them 80% of the results they need, then drill it obsessively through deliberate practice. A 19-year-old app developer doesn't need a computer science degree to build a viral product. they need to master just 3 things: basic coding in one language, user psychology, and rapid prototyping. Everything else can be learned as needed. This explains how individuals like Mark Zuckerberg could create Facebook while still an undergraduate. He focused only on the immediately applicable skills while competitors were stuck in curriculum mode. Your personal learning system should mirror how the human brain actually retains information through storytelling, emotional connection, and spaced repetition. Ancient Greek orators used memory palaces to recall hours-long speeches. Today's accelerated learners use similar neuroscience hacks. An aspiring financier might create an alter ego Warren Buffett Twitter account where they daily explain complex concepts in simple terms, forcing true comprehension. A future fashion designer could build a failure scrapbook, documenting every flawed sketch alongside lessons learned. The key is developing feedback loops where knowledge transforms into creation, creation generates real-world data, and that data informs the next learning cycle. This chapter will arm you with battle-tested tools. The 20-hour rule for rapid skill acquisition, first documented by Josh Kaufman. The Feynman technique for mastering complex concepts by teaching them to a child. And the Dreyfus model for identifying exactly which stage of learning you're in at any given moment. You'll analyze case studies like the 16-year-old who reverse-engineered Tesla's battery technology using only YouTube tutorials and public patents, or the stay-at-home mom who became a sought-after AI prompt engineer through disciplined daily practice. By the end, you'll have constructed a personalized learning engine that outpaces formal education, one that turns coffee shops into classrooms, failures into PhD-level lessons, and curiosity into an unstoppable advantage. In an age where AI makes knowledge obsolete faster than ever, the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn will be the only degree that never expires. Chapter 4. Turn weakness into strength. The most transformative breakthroughs in human history weren't crafted by perfect specimens of conventional genius. They were forged by those who weaponized their supposed flaws, traumas, and societal disadvantages into unassailable advantages. This chapter dismantles the toxic cultural obsession with well-roundedness and reveals why your deepest insecurities, the learning disability that made school unbearable, the social anxiety that made networking feel impossible, the poverty that forced you to hustle differently, are actually your unfair competitive edges in disguise. Consider how Richard Branson's dyslexia prevented him from parsing dense business documents, which forced him to develop radical simplification strategies that later made Virgin's customer experiences industry-leading. Or how Oprah Winfrey transformed the shame of her childhood poverty into an unparalleled ability to connect with audiences' emotional truths, a skill no media training could ever replicate. These aren't feel-good stories about overcoming adversity. They're tactical blueprints for reverse engineering your perceived liabilities into strategic assets so unique that no conventionally perfect competitor can mimic them. The process begins with ruthless reframing. Every limitation contains hidden leverage points if examined through the right lens. A stutter becomes a forcing function to craft more impactful written communication, as it did for Winston Churchill. A chronic illness imposes constraints that breed creative workarounds, like Frida Kahlo's bedbound painting sessions that birthed an entirely new artistic style. Even something as seemingly trivial as being the awkward kid can evolve into observational superpowers. Tim Burton's social alienation in childhood directly fueled his ability to spot bizarre beauty where others saw only mundanity. The key lies in what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where survivors of extreme adversity develop precocious skills in pattern recognition, risk assessment, and emotional intelligence that comfortable peers take decades longer to acquire, if ever. This chapter will guide you through conducting a shadow skills inventory, a forensic examination of all the unconventional abilities your struggles have forced you to develop. Perhaps years of financial instability taught you to bootstrap like a Navy SEAL while trust fund kids burn through capital. Maybe your immigrant background gave you multilingual fluidity and cross-cultural negotiation instincts that elite MBAs pay 6 figures to poorly simulate. Even failed ventures leave behind priceless neural wiring. A bankrupt entrepreneur gains spidey sense for red flags that case studies can't teach. These aren't consolation prizes. They're the equivalent of video game characters acquiring damage-resistant armor precisely where they've been most frequently hit. The most explosive transformations occur when individuals stop trying to fix their differences and instead design environments where those differences become the winning criteria. NBA legend Muggsy Bogues dominated at 5 feet 3 inches in a league of giants by perfecting steals and assists that taller players couldn't execute. The entire K-pop industry was built around Park Jin-young realizing his unmarketable looks by Western standards could define a new aesthetic paradigm. You'll analyze modern case studies like the ADHD entrepreneur who structured her entire company around hyperfocus sprints, turning her disorder into a productivity hack that neurotypical employees pay coaches to emulate. By chapter's end, you'll have mapped your entire history of failures, embarrassments, and disadvantages onto a strategic advantage matrix, identifying which perceived weaknesses to discard, the actual limiting beliefs, which to transform, the skills in disguise, and which to aggressively weaponize, the differentiators that make you irreplaceable. This isn't motivational fluff. It's the same framework guerrilla armies use to turn lack of heavy artillery into superior mobility tactics. The future belongs to those who can look at their scars and see not evidence of damage, but encrypted blueprints for domination. Your greatest power doesn't lie in correcting your flaws, but in crafting a battleground where only your peculiar form of brokenness becomes the winning standard. Chapter 5. Build a winning mindset. The difference between those who rise to the top against all odds and those who remain trapped in mediocrity has nothing to do with talent, resources, or luck. It comes down to one invisible, trainable superpower: mindset. This chapter isn't about positive thinking or motivational platitudes. It's a tactical deep dive into the specific cognitive frameworks that allow underdogs to outmaneuver better-equipped opponents, transforming impossible dreams into inevitable outcomes through sheer psychological architecture. At the highest levels of achievement, everyone has access to similar information and tools. What separates world-class performers is their ability to construct mental operating systems that convert obstacles into fuel, criticism into useful data, and uncertainty into creative possibility. Consider how Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team, an event that would have crushed most aspiring athletes. Instead of accepting this as proof of his limitations, Jordan used it as the foundation for what psychologists now call a rage to mastery. Training before dawn every morning with a pathological intensity that turned rejection into the defining catalyst of his career. Or examine how Sarah Blakely, founder of Spanx, spent 2 years cold-calling manufacturers with no fashion experience, hearing no hundreds of times, not because she was delusional, but because she had engineered a mindset that interpreted rejection as market research rather than failure. These aren't exceptional cases. They're examples of what happens when ordinary people install extraordinary mental software. The most dangerous myth about success is the idea that confidence must precede achievement, that you need to feel ready before taking massive action. Neuroscience reveals the opposite is true. Action rewires the brain to generate confidence as a byproduct. World-class performers understand this intimately, which is why they practice what Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck calls the habit of becoming, behaving as the person they intend to be before external validation arrives. A struggling writer who begins introducing themselves as an author at parties isn't being dishonest. They're triggering cognitive dissonance that forces their subconscious to align with this identity. A broke entrepreneur who structures their day like a CEO isn't playing pretend. They're creating behavioral evidence that reshapes their self-concept at the neurological level. This chapter will expose you to the dark psychology of peak performance, the uncomfortable truths elite competitors know but rarely discuss. You'll learn why Navy SEALs intentionally create misery libraries of past suffering to access during tough moments, how chess grandmasters program their brains to find pleasure in losing, because it reveals weaknesses to address, and why the most successful founders schedule regular panic blocks to process fear rather than suppress it. These aren't natural traits. They're trained responses. You'll master the double crucible technique used by Olympic athletes. First exposing yourself to controlled adversity, cold showers, calculated social embarrassment, to build resilience, then conducting after-action reports that extract maximum learning from every experience. The most transformative mindset shift occurs when you stop viewing challenges as threats and start seeing them as diagnostic tools, each difficulty precisely revealing what needs development. When a venture capitalist rejects your pitch, they're not judging you. They're giving free consulting on which aspects of your business model need refinement. When a skill feels impossibly hard to learn, it's not proof of inadequacy. It's signaling exactly which neural pathways need reinforcement. You'll analyze case studies like James Dyson's 5,126 failed prototypes before creating the world's first bagless vacuum, or how Thomas Edison reframed his 10,000 unsuccessful attempts not as failures but as discovering 10,000 ways that don't work. By chapter's end, you'll have constructed a personalized cognitive playbook, complete with neurohacks to override self-doubt, ritualized systems to maintain focus amidst chaos, and reality distortion techniques that allow you to pursue unreasonable goals with rational precision. This isn't about tricking yourself into happiness. It's about engineering a mind that thrives on obstacles the way fire thrives on oxygen. The greatest leverage point in any underdog's journey isn't money, connections, or talent. It's the ability to process reality through frameworks that transform every disadvantage into a hidden advantage, every setback into a setup, and every limitation into the raw material for unprecedented innovation. Your mindset isn't just part of the game. It's the operating system that determines whether you'll play to survive or play to dominate. Chapter 6. The Power of Small Daily Wins. The seismic shifts that propel ordinary people to extraordinary heights are never the result of singular, earth-shattering moments. They are the inevitable culmination of hundreds of seemingly insignificant daily choices, compounded over time with mathematical precision. This chapter dismantles our cultural obsession with overnight success and reveals the hidden architecture of incremental mastery. How microscopic improvements, when executed with ruthless consistency, create exponential results that appear magical to outside observers. At the heart of every world-class performer's journey lies what physicists call the compound effect. The same principle that turns a single penny doubled daily into $5 million within a month. The brutal truth most people never grasp is that success is boring before it becomes exciting. A truth evidenced by the fact that while millions dream of writing a best-selling novel, fewer than 0.1% maintain a daily writing habit of just 300 words. Enough to complete a book annually. The neuroscience behind small wins reveals why they outperform sporadic bursts of effort. Each micro-victory triggers dopamine release that not only reinforces the behavior but literally rewires neural pathways to make subsequent actions easier, a phenomenon psychologists term success momentum. Consider how David Goggins transformed from a 300-pound exterminator to a record-breaking Navy SEAL through what he calls the 40% rule. The understanding that when your mind tells you you're done, you've typically only tapped 40% of your capacity. His methodology wasn't heroic feats, but daily acts of calculated discomfort. Doing just one more pull-up than yesterday, running one extra mile when exhausted, that aggregated into superhuman capabilities. Similarly, J. Rowling's Harry Potter empire wasn't birthed in a stroke of inspiration but through writing daily in Edinburgh cafes while on welfare, often producing just a few paragraphs between diaper changes. This chapter will expose you to military-grade habit formation techniques adapted from the world's most disciplined performers. You'll learn the 2-minute rule, used by Japanese Kaizen masters, breaking intimidating goals into actions so small, like writing one sentence or doing 2 push-ups, that resistance becomes impossible. You'll discover why chess prodigies practice blindfolded for just 15 minutes daily rather than marathon sessions. Because focused micropractice creates deeper myelination of neural circuits. The Seinfeld strategy, named after Jerry Seinfeld's infamous calendar chain method, reveals why visual tracking of daily consistency triggers our brain's pattern completion obsession. The same psychological mechanism that makes social media streaks so addictive, but weaponized for self-mastery. Real-world case studies will demonstrate the staggering power of marginal gains. How the British cycling team dominated the Tour de France by improving hundreds of elements by just 1%. From pillow ergonomics to hand-washing techniques. You'll analyze how a TikTok influencer gained 2 million followers by posting daily 30-second videos for 500 consecutive days. Or how a self-taught programmer landed a 6-figure job by solving just one coding challenge every morning before work. These aren't exceptions, they're applications of what Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls the aggregation of marginal advantages, where small, consistent actions create nonlinear breakthroughs. The most transformative element of this chapter is the daily dominance drill, a proprietary system that combines atomic habits with neurobiological triggers. You'll learn to engineer success spirals by 1. Identifying your keystone habit, the one behavior that disproportionately influences other areas, like morning exercise boosting productivity. 2. Creating implementation intentions, specific, if-then plans for obstacles. 3. Building habit stacks by piggybacking new behaviors onto existing routines. And 4. Designing progress triggers, visual, auditory, or tactile cues that reinforce micro-wins. An aspiring entrepreneur might start with just 2 minutes of daily market research while their coffee brews, while a future athlete could begin with 5 minutes of balance drills, insignificant in isolation but revolutionary over quarters and years. By chapter's end, you'll possess what Stanford researchers call a growth architecture. A personalized system that transforms discipline from a finite resource into an automatic process. You'll understand why Warren Buffett reads 500 pages daily not through willpower but because his environment makes it the path of least resistance. Most importantly, you'll recognize that the grandest achievements are merely the visible peaks of submerged mountains built day by invisible day, that the secret to becoming world-class isn't quantum leaps, but showing up daily with the consistency of a glacier carving canyons. In a world distracted by shiny objects, your competitive edge will be the boring, beautiful patience to let compounding work its magic. One microscopic victory at a time. Chapter 7. Make people want to help you. The myth of the lone genius changing the world through sheer individual brilliance is perhaps the most damaging illusion in success literature. A toxic narrative that has led millions of talented people to stall their potential by failing to grasp one fundamental truth. No significant achievement in human history was accomplished in true isolation. This chapter systematically dismantles the self-made fantasy and replaces it with a ruthless pragmatism. The understanding that strategic alliance building is not merely helpful, but absolutely foundational to world-class achievement. We will explore the hidden networks, psychological triggers, and reciprocity systems that allow certain individuals to consistently attract mentors, collaborators, and advocates while others, often equally talented, remain stuck in obscurity. The difference between these two groups has nothing to do with luck or nepotism, and everything to do with mastering what sociologists call the economy of favors. An invisible marketplace where influence, knowledge, and opportunities circulate based on predictable psychological principles that can be learned, engineered, and leveraged regardless of your starting position. Consider how a young Leonardo da Vinci, born illegitimate in rural 15th century Italy with no formal education, managed to become the protégé of Andrea del Verrocchio, one of Florence's most powerful artists. Da Vinci didn't achieve this through cold applications or random chance, but by demonstrating such obsessive dedication to his craft that he essentially made himself impossible to ignore. Arriving at Verrocchio's workshop with portfolios of work that revealed both precocious talent and relentless work ethic. Contrast this with modern examples like Steve Jobs strategically positioning himself near Silicon Valley's key players, including intentionally attending the same Zen meditation center as early tech investors, or Oprah Winfrey transforming her television show into a platform that made helping her synonymous with accessing millions of viewers. These patterns repeat throughout history. World-class performers don't just happen to get help. They architect circumstances where assisting them becomes the obvious, mutually beneficial choice for those with resources to share. The psychology behind why people help certain individuals over others reveals several counterintuitive truths. Research from Harvard's Human Flourishing program shows that requests for assistance are most likely to succeed when they tap into the potential helpers. 1. Desire to feel like a mentor, triggering our deep-seated need for legacy. 2. Curiosity about an unusual problem, engaging intellectual challenge. Or 3. Opportunity to showcase their expertise, feeding the universal hunger for recognition. This explains why cold emails fail while carefully crafted challenge statements. I've tried X and Y to solve Z problem with surprising results. Would love your perspective on why Y didn't work as expected. Receive disproportionate responses even from busy luminaries. The most effective help seekers don't plead. They strategically position their requests as intriguing puzzles that allow the helper to feel intellectually stimulated and professionally flattered. This chapter will provide you with a tactical blueprint for building what sociologists term social capital, the intangible currency of favors, introductions, and goodwill that accelerates success exponentially. You'll learn the reciprocity ring technique used at MIT's Media Lab, a systematic approach to requesting help that increases positive response rates by 400% by framing needs as mutually beneficial collaborations rather than one-sided asks. You'll master the 5-minute favor concept from Wharton's Adam Grant. Small but high-impact actions that make you memorable to influential people without imposing on their time. Sending a relevant research paper. Making an introduction between two contacts who should know each other. Case studies will reveal how a college dropout gained access to billionaire investors by creating detailed analyses of their past deals, demonstrating value before asking for anything. Or how a young designer landed her dream job by redesigning a company's website as an unsolicited case study, not as a job application, but as proof of her unique perspective. Perhaps most crucially, you'll learn to avoid what networking expert Judy Robinette calls the beggar mentality. The fatal mistake of approaching potential mentors with vague requests that force them to do emotional and intellectual labor, pick my brain, be my mentor. Instead, you'll implement the specific ask framework, always requesting 1. Defined actions. Could you introduce me to X person? Rather than help me get connected. 2. Within specific time frames. Would you have 15 minutes in the next month too? And 3. With clear exit ramps. If you're too busy, I completely understand. This professionalizes the interaction while making it psychologically easier for high-status individuals to say yes. The chapter culminates with advanced strategies for transforming casual connections into powerful advocates. What author Michael Simmons calls the 5-hour rule of relationships. You'll learn how to 1. Identify linchpin individuals whose networks can open disproportionate doors, executive assistants, community connectors, retired industry veterans. 2. Create give first habits that build social capital before you need it, the favor bank principle. And 3. Engineer chance encounters through strategic attendance at smaller, high-leverage events rather than crowded conferences. Real-world examples will show how one entrepreneur gained access to a notoriously reclusive billionaire by volunteering at his foundation's charity events, or how a musician landed a record deal by consistently supporting other artists in his genre until his name became synonymous with the movement. By chapter's end, you'll possess what historian Robert Greene terms the courtier's mindset. The Renaissance-era understanding that success flows not to the most talented individuals in absolute terms, but to those who master the art of making their talents visible and valuable to the right audiences. You'll stop seeing networking as a distasteful necessity and start recognizing it as the sophisticated skill of aligning your unique abilities with society's existing reward systems. In a world where access often matters more than raw capability, your ability to make helping you feel like the obvious, rewarding choice for those with resources will become your ultimate force multiplier, turning solitary struggles into collaborative victories and transforming what should take decades into what can happen in years. Chapter 8. Fail forward fast. The single greatest competitive advantage you can cultivate in the modern era is not intelligence, talent, or resources. It is the ability to fail better than anyone else. This chapter eviscerates society's pathological fear of failure and replaces it with an engineering mindset that treats setbacks as the most valuable form of data collection. We will dissect the hidden architecture behind what Silicon Valley euphemistically calls rapid iteration, the systematic process by which world-class performers transform humiliation into mastery with terrifying efficiency. At elite levels of any field, failure is not the opposite of success. It is success in its larval stage. A truth evidenced by the fact that Nobel Prize-winning scientists experience 90% more failed experiments than their peers, and championship athletes lose significantly more often during training than mediocre competitors who play it safe. The neuroscience of failure reveals why most people get it catastrophically wrong. When the brain encounters unexpected negative outcomes, it triggers 2 possible pathways: the threat response, amygdala activation causing avoidance behaviors, or the learning response, dopamine-driven pattern recognition. The difference between these reactions determines whether someone becomes paralyzed by imposter syndrome or develops what Stanford researchers call failure immunity, the ability to extract maximum insight from minimum experience. Consider how Thomas Edison's team documented over 9,000 unsuccessful filament combinations for the light bulb, with each failure systematically eliminating possibilities until only the solution remained. Or examine modern examples like James Dyson's 5,127 prototypes before creating the first bagless vacuum, a process he now describes as learning 5,127 ways not to make a vacuum cleaner. The ultimate mastery comes when you develop what we term anticipatory resilience, the ability to predict potential failure modes before they occur. Chess grandmasters study lost games more than victories. Doctors train with elaborate simulations of worst-case scenarios. SpaceX intentionally blows up rockets to gather failure data. You'll learn to construct your own pre-mortem exercises, imagining future failures to inoculate against them today. By chapter's end, you'll possess what Silicon Valley's top founders call a PhD in screwing up, the calibrated ability to fail frequently enough to accelerate learning, but not so catastrophically that recovery becomes impossible. In an era where the half-life of skills shrinks yearly, your ability to learn from mistakes faster than competitors becomes your ultimate career insurance. The future belongs not to those who avoid failure, but to those who fail smart, fail fast, and fail forward, turning what would destroy others into what propels you further than success ever could. Chapter 9. Create something the world needs. The most dangerous lie ever sold about success is the idea that you must compete in saturated markets, fighting for scraps of attention in overcrowded industries, when the reality is that world-changing opportunities don't come from following well-worn paths, but from identifying the invisible gaps between what exists and what should exist, then building bridges across those chasms with such precision that the world wonders how it ever survived without your contribution. This chapter is not about entrepreneurship in the traditional sense. It's about developing what physicist Albert Laszlo Barabasi calls the opportunity lens, a trained way of seeing latent needs, underserved niches, and systemic inefficiencies that others overlook because they're too busy chasing trendy, hyper-competitive spaces. The difference between struggling in a crowded market and dominating an uncontested one often comes down to one critical skill: the ability to detect what economist Clayton Christensen termed non-consumption. Entire populations who would engage with a product or service if only it were accessible, affordable, or tailored to their unarticulated desires. Consider how Airbnb didn't outcompete hotels. It unlocked an entirely new category of travelers who wanted local experiences rather than sterile lobbies, turning spare rooms into a billion-dollar industry that previously didn't exist. Or examine how Canva democratized design not by competing with Adobe for professionals, but by empowering small business owners who needed good graphics but lacked technical skills, a market incumbents had ignored because they couldn't imagine non-designers as valuable customers. The process of creating something the world needs begins with what Japanese innovators call gemba, the practice of going to the actual place where problems exist and observing reality without preconceptions. When Sarah Blakely cut the feet off her pantyhose to create smoother lines under white pants, she wasn't conducting market research. She was living the frustration that would become Spanx. When Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia started renting air mattresses in their apartment to conference attendees, they weren't planning to disrupt hospitality. They were solving their own rent crisis while accidentally uncovering a massive unmet need. This chapter will teach you how to become what Stanford's D. School calls an extreme noticer, someone who spots anomalies, inconveniences, and workarounds in daily life that signal hidden opportunities. You'll learn to track what people complain about but tolerate, like terrible airport food before Sweet Green, what they love but can't easily access, like professional photography before smartphones, and what they desperately need but don't yet have language to request, like ride-sharing before Uber. The most powerful innovations don't come from focus groups asking what people want. They emerge from observing what people actually do despite obstacles, then removing friction with elegant solutions. We'll analyze case studies of individuals who identified white space in seemingly mature industries. How Whitney Wolfe built Bumble by recognizing that female users wanted control in online dating, not just another swipe app. How Patagonia's Yvon Chouinard turned rock climbing gear into a billion-dollar sustainability brand by catering to outdoors people who cared about environmental ethics. How Duolingo leveraged gamification to make language learning addictive for people who'd failed with traditional methods. These weren't random strokes of genius. They were the result of methodical need-finding in overlooked corners of the market. You'll master the jobs to be done framework developed by Harvard Business School. The understanding that people don't buy products, they hire solutions to accomplish specific emotional, social, or functional jobs. Nobody wants a drill bit. They want a hole. Nobody wants a fitness tracker. They want validation of their health efforts. By reframing your thinking this way, you'll start seeing opportunities everywhere. From the mom inventing a better baby bottle at her kitchen table to the teenager coding an app to streamline his homework. The second half of the chapter reveals how to validate demand before investing significant resources, a process Silicon Valley elites call building the minimum viable celebrity. You'll learn how to 1. Conduct prototyping experiments, like Alberto Savoya's famous phone booth test, where he validated demand for a speech recognition product by faking it with a human operator behind curtains before writing a single line of code. Leverage fake door tests, measuring interest through phantom product listings or waitlists to gauge real demand. Create concierge MVPs, manually delivering the service you plan to automate, as Zappos did by photographing shoes at local stores before building inventory. You'll study how Dropbox grew before having a finished product by releasing a demo video that went viral with tech early adopters, or how Buffer started as a 2-page website collecting email signups to validate willingness to pay for social media scheduling. These strategies allow you to pressure test ideas with near zero cost while collecting invaluable data from real users, a stark contrast to the traditional approach of building in isolation for years only to discover nobody cares. The chapter culminates with the 10x rule for opportunity evaluation, a ruthless filter used by top venture capitalists to separate fleeting ideas from transformative ventures. You'll assess potential projects based on pain level. Is this a nice-to-have or a must-solve problem? Market blindness. Why haven't incumbents addressed this? Is their oversight your advantage? Behavioral inertia. What habits would need to change for adoption? And how can you make switching effortless? hidden stakeholders, who indirectly benefits from this solution and could become unexpected champions. By the end, you'll possess what Y Combinator calls a builder's mindset. The ability to spot problems worth solving, validate them systematically, and create solutions so obviously needed that they spread through word of mouth alone. In an economy where attention is scarce but unmet needs are abundant, your capacity to identify and serve the gaps becomes the ultimate leverage point, transforming you from another competitor in a crowded field to the architect of a category only you can own. The world doesn't need more copycats. It needs original thinkers willing to build what doesn't yet exist but soon will feel indispensable. Your mission isn't to compete. It's to render competition irrelevant by creating something so uniquely valuable that the market reshapes itself around your vision. Chapter 10. Become unstoppable. The final frontier between you and world-class achievement isn't talent, resources, or even opportunity. It's the psychological armor to continue when every neuron in your brain screams for surrender, when external evidence suggests your goals are impossible, when the people you love most question your sanity. This chapter is a deep dive into the neurobiology and applied psychology of perseverance, revealing how ordinary people develop what Navy SEALs call the 40% rule, the documented phenomenon that when your mind tells you you're exhausted, you've typically only tapped 40% of your true capacity. We'll explore how world-class performers rewire their brains to treat discomfort as information rather than threat, transforming pain into fuel through what Stanford researchers term stress inoculation. The process of systematically exposing yourself to controlled adversity to build resilience, much like vaccines expose the body to weaken viruses. The difference between those who change the world and those who watch from the sidelines comes down to one critical skill: the ability to sustain effort long after initial motivation evaporates, to keep showing up when the novelty fades and the work becomes a grind, what psychologists call the messy middle, where 90% of people quit. Consider the case of Japanese novelist Haruki Murakami, who describes running a jazz club for 7 years before his first literary success. A period where he would wake at 4 a.m. to write before work, then return to the bar until midnight, repeating this grueling schedule for years without validation. Or examine modern examples like Twitter's early days, when the team worked 20-hour shifts for months with just a few hundred active users, or how Serena Williams trained through injuries so severe she could barely walk after sessions, programming her nervous system to perform under conditions that would hospitalize most athletes. These aren't stories of superhuman endurance, but of ordinary people who mastered specific cognitive frameworks that allowed them to override evolutionary impulses toward comfort and conservation. The most dangerous myth about perseverance is that it's an innate trait. In reality, it's a learnable skill composed of discrete psychological components that can be isolated, trained, and integrated like any other ability. This chapter will provide you with a tactical blueprint for building what special forces psychologists call unshakable forward momentum, a state where obstacles cease being stop signs and instead become terrain to navigate. You'll learn 1. The Progress Preservation Protocol: how to design failure circuits into your workflow that automatically convert setbacks into course corrections without emotional collapse, modeled after SpaceX's approach to rocket explosions, where every crash yields more data than 100 successful flights. The Micro-Win Engine, a neuroscientifically validated system for structuring small, daily victories that trigger dopamine release to maintain momentum, even when big breakthroughs seem distant, used by Olympic athletes during multi-year training cycles. The Identity Anchoring Technique: how to hardwire your self-concept so thoroughly to your mission that temporary failures can't derail you, as demonstrated by authors like Stephen King, who wrote Carrie while living in a trailer, rejecting the idea of being anything other than a writer despite crushing poverty. 4. The Adversity Tax Calculation, a cold-eyed framework for determining in advance what psychological and physical costs you're willing to incur for your goals. Similar to how Jeff Bezos calculated exactly how many years of 80-hour weeks he could endure when founding Amazon, we'll analyze historical case studies of perseverance through the lens of modern neuroscience. How Thomas Edison's team documented 10,000 unsuccessful attempts at the light bulb, not through blind optimism but through what we now recognize as growth mindset conditioning. How Marie Curie conducted her Nobel Prize-winning research on radioactivity in an unheated shed after being denied proper lab space due to gender discrimination. How Sylvester Stallone wrote Rocky while homeless, selling his dog for $25 to survive before buying him back after selling the script. These individuals weren't immune to despair. They simply had systems for processing it faster and returning to action. The chapter's most potent section reveals military-grade techniques for what psychologists call selective attention deployment, training your brain to focus only on the next actionable step when overwhelmed. You'll learn the 5-5-5 survival algorithm, used by Everest climbers. When facing paralysis, ask, What can I do in the next 5 seconds to move forward? The next 5 minutes? The next 5 hours? This prevents the cognitive shutdown that occurs when contemplating the full, terrifying distance to your goal. Navy SEALs apply a similar principle with their 40% rule. When certain they can't continue, they focus solely on completing the current drill, then the next, discovering that capacity expands with repetition. Perhaps most crucially, you'll master what positive psychology founder Martin Seligman calls learned optimism, the practice of interpreting setbacks as temporary, specific, and external rather than permanent, pervasive, and personal. World-class performers don't experience fewer defeats. They process them through frameworks that preserve forward momentum. When a promising startup fails, the entrepreneur who views it as, "I learned exactly what doesn't work in this market," will outlast the one who concludes, "I'm not cut out for business." By chapter's end, you'll possess what psychologists call goal shielding, the ability to maintain focus on long-term objectives while filtering out distractions and temporary failures. You'll understand why J. Rowling could endure 12 publisher rejections for Harry Potter while others quit after the first no. Why Michael Jordan returned to basketball after professional baseball failure to win 3 more championships. Why Elon Musk continued SpaceX after 3 consecutive rocket explosions left him with money for just 1 more attempt. In each case, their perseverance wasn't blind faith but the result of cognitive architectures that transformed obstacles into stepping stones. The ultimate insight of this chapter is that becoming unstoppable isn't about never falling. It's about perfecting your get-up. In a world where most dreams die not from lack of potential but from premature surrender, your willingness to continue when logic says quit becomes your ultimate competitive advantage. The future belongs not to the most talented but to the most tenacious, those who've engineered their psychology to outlast resistance, outthink obstacles, and outwork doubt until their goals have no choice but to surrender. When you reach this state, you won't need to chase success. It will have no choice but to chase you. Chapter 11. Lead without a title. The most dangerous misconception about leadership is that it requires formal authority, that you must wait for a promotion, a diploma, or someone's permission to start influencing outcomes and driving change. This chapter dismantles that illusion completely by revealing how true leadership operates as a psychological current rather than an organizational chart, how the most impactful leaders throughout history, from underground resistance fighters to open-source software pioneers, exerted disproportionate influence long before holding any official title. We will explore the neuroscience of what Harvard researchers call informal leadership, the demonstrable phenomenon that humans instinctively follow those who display specific combinations of competence, clarity, and emotional contagion, regardless of their formal position. The reality is that leadership isn't bestowed. It's claimed through consistent action in ambiguous situations, a truth evidenced by how teenage climate activists like Greta Thunberg commanded global attention without political office, or how Wikipedia editors maintain quality control without traditional managerial roles. At the core of titleless leadership lies what sociologists term referent power, influence gained when others voluntarily align with you because they respect your expertise or character, rather than fearing consequences. This explains why the most effective engineers at Google aren't necessarily managers but tech leads, who guide projects through pure competency, or why some nurses wield more influence in hospitals than administrators through their crisis-tested judgment. The key insight is that humans are biologically wired to follow those who reduce uncertainty, a survival mechanism dating back to tribal environments where following the most skilled hunter or wisest elder increased survival odds. Modern organizations still operate on this primitive circuitry. When someone consistently demonstrates the ability to solve problems others can't, articulate compelling visions of the future, and maintain emotional stability under pressure, followers emerge organically, not because they have to, but because they want to. This chapter will provide you with a tactical blueprint for developing what Stanford's Persuasion Technology Lab calls the 5 pillars of informal authority. 1. Precision language patterns, how to communicate with what the U. Special Operations community terms violent clarity, eliminating hedges, qualifiers, and ambiguity that erode perceived competence. Study how NASA engineers speak during mission crises. The Eisenhower Matrix for Relationships, a strategic framework for investing in linchpin individuals whose networks and knowledge create disproportionate leverage, modeled after how Benjamin Franklin cultivated printers, postmasters, and tavern owners to spread ideas pre-revolution. The Swiss cheese influence model, why identifying and patching small organizational gaps, like undocumented processes or communication breakdowns, builds credibility faster than tackling high-visibility projects. The Socratic disruption technique, asking precisely calibrated questions that expose systemic flaws without triggering defensiveness, as demonstrated by Toyota's legendary 5 Whys methodology. The shadow board concept, creating parallel decision-making bodies that address leadership blind spots, like how young employees at Unilever formed an advisory group that now directly influences C-suite strategy. We'll analyze historical case studies of informal leadership through modern behavioral science lenses. How enslaved mathematician Thomas Fuller calculated complex astronomical equations that plantation owners relied upon despite his legal status as property. How Rosalind Franklin's X-ray diffraction data proved critical to discovering DNA's structure, though she was excluded from the Nobel Prize. How Wikipedia administrator Grillita, a pseudonym, shaped content policies affecting millions, without ever revealing her real identity. These individuals commanded influence through what organizational psychologists call expert power, the authority that flows not from titles but from indisputable mastery. The most transformative section reveals military-derived strategies for leading up the chain of command, techniques like the 3-3-3 briefing format, used by junior Pentagon analysts to influence generals, 3 key facts, 3 implications, 3 recommended actions. Or the commander's intent method for aligning teams without micromanagement, articulating the goal's purpose rather than prescribing steps. You'll learn how a frontline UPS driver redesigned package routing algorithms that saved millions, how a Starbucks barista suggestion created the pumpkin spice latte phenomenon, and how open-source programmers guide global software development through meritocratic commit rights rather than corporate hierarchies. Perhaps most critically, you'll master the influence stack, a layered approach to building authority pioneered by management thinker David Marquet. Layer 1. Demonstrate competence. Master your craft to the point where others seek your input. Layer 2. Frame context. Help others understand why their work matters in larger systems. Layer 3. Expand agency. Create conditions where teammates feel ownership over outcomes. Layer 4. Architect legacy. Design self-sustaining systems that outlast your involvement. By chapter's end, you'll possess what the U. Army War College calls leader's intent, the ability to create alignment and action without relying on positional power. You'll understand why the most successful startups often have fluid hierarchies, why Wikipedia outperforms traditional encyclopedias with no top-down control, and why future organizations increasingly resemble jazz ensembles rather than military units. Improvised coordination around shared purpose rather than rigid command structures. The ultimate insight is this: leadership isn't about having followers. It's about creating more leaders. In an era where traditional hierarchies crumble daily, your ability to influence without authority, to coordinate without control, and to inspire without imposition becomes the ultimate career accelerant. The world doesn't need more bosses. It needs more people willing to step into the leadership vacuum that exists everywhere problems go unsolved. Your title doesn't define your leadership capacity. Your willingness to assume responsibility for outcomes that aren't technically your job does. When you operate this way, promotions cease to be necessities. They become formalities ratifying the influence you've already earned. Chapter 12. Master the Art of Luck. The most insidious myth about success is the idea that luck is purely random, a cosmic lottery where some are arbitrarily chosen for fortune while others languish in obscurity. This chapter systematically dismantles that passive mindset and replaces it with what researchers at the University of Hertfordshire call luck engineering, the scientifically validated understanding that while we can't control chance events themselves, we can dramatically increase their probability and capitalize on them with surgical precision when they occur. At the heart of this approach lies a paradigm-shifting revelation. What we call luck is actually the emergent property of specific behaviors, cognitive frameworks, and environmental manipulations that make positive statistical outliers inevitable rather than accidental. Consider how the same individual, whether an entrepreneur like Elon Musk or an artist like Banksy, seems to experience lucky breaks repeatedly across decades and industries, while others wait eternally for their big chance that never comes. The difference isn't supernatural favoritism but what psychologists term preparedness meeting opportunity, a state achieved through deliberate strategies that transform you into what luck researcher Dr. Richard Wiseman calls a luck vortex, someone who magnetizes and multiplies favorable circumstances through observable, replicable techniques. The neuroscience behind luck engineering reveals that what we perceive as serendipity is actually pattern recognition operating at an unconscious level. When Pasteur remarked that chance favors the prepared mind, he was describing the neurological reality that brains immersed in specific domains develop enhanced perceptual sensitivity to relevant opportunities, like a trained musician hearing perfect pitch in random noise or a chess master spotting winning moves where amateurs see only chaos. This explains why Silicon Valley veterans consistently stumble upon groundbreaking startups early, their mental frameworks recognize potential in nascent ideas, or why certain journalists reliably get lucky with exclusive scoops. Their source networks and investigative habits create more opportunity windows. The most successful people don't experience more random chance. They construct lifestyles and cognitive architectures that increase the surface area for positive outliers while developing the reflexes to exploit them. A study tracking lucky versus unlucky individuals found that the former consistently demonstrated three behaviors. They exposed themselves to more novel experiences, increasing opportunity collisions, maintained relaxed awareness, spotting subtle chances others miss, and embraced uncertainty, reframing setbacks as potential luck in disguise. This chapter will arm you with battle-tested techniques to transform your luck quotient, including the serendipity scaffolding method used by Nobel Prize-winning scientists, a system for structuring your environment to force productive accidents. You'll learn how to apply the 1% edge principle, making small adjustments to your daily routines that compound into massive opportunity differentials over time. Master the luck stacking approach pioneered by professional poker players, layering multiple small probability advantages until favorable outcomes become statistically inevitable, and implement the weak tie cultivation strategy validated by MIT sociologists. How casual acquaintances provide disproportionate career breakthroughs compared to close contacts. Real-world case studies will demonstrate these principles in action. How a struggling writer's random blog comment led to a 7-figure book deal because she consistently engaged with her niche community. How a hobbyist photographer's Instagram experiment snowballed into a National Geographic assignment through strategic hashtag use. How a minimum wage worker landed his dream job by applying the 20-minute rule. For conference networking, standing near food lines where executives were captive audiences. Perhaps most powerfully, you'll discover the luck amplification loop, the virtuous cycle where small wins increase your visibility and credibility, attracting bigger opportunities that compound into career-defining breaks. This explains how unknown musicians get lucky viral breaks after years of consistent output, building the infrastructure to capitalize on attention spikes, or how entrepreneurs suddenly secure funding after dozens of rejections. Their refined pitch and traction metrics finally intersect with investor priorities. The chapter culminates with the controlled chaos system, a methodology for injecting calculated randomness into your life while maintaining directional purpose, modeled after how Amazon's Jeff Bezos allocates small bets budget for experimental projects that occasionally yield AWS-sized wins. By the end, you'll possess what high-performance researchers call luck intelligence, the ability to systematically engineer favorable probability while retaining the agility to pivot when fortune whispers. In a world where traditional paths to success grow more crowded by the minute, your mastery of probabilistic advantage becomes the ultimate edge, transforming you from someone who hopes for luck into someone who manufactures it on demand. Chapter 13. Stay hungry, stay kind. The most paradoxical trait of history's truly transformative figures, from Leonardo da Vinci to Oprah Winfrey, is their ability to maintain relentless ambition while cultivating radical humility, a dual mindset that acts as both rocket fuel and stabilizer in their ascent to greatness. This chapter dismantles the toxic cultural narrative that success requires ruthless self-interest, revealing instead how the longest-lasting, most impactful achievements emerge from what psychologists call the humility-ambition paradox, a rare combination of indomitable drive and genuine concern for others that creates a virtuous cycle of growth, opportunity, and influence. At the heart of this approach lies a profound neurological truth. The brain regions activated during authentic service to others overlap significantly with those responsible for creative problem-solving and strategic thinking, meaning that kindness isn't just morally admirable. It's tactically superior for sustained high performance. Consider how Abraham Lincoln's capacity for empathy and political savviness allowed him to navigate the Civil War while preparing the nation for Reconstruction, or how modern tech leaders like Satya Nadella transformed Microsoft's culture by replacing know-it-all arrogance with learn-it-all curiosity, sparking a renaissance of innovation that propelled the company to trillion-dollar valuation. These aren't feel-good stories. They're case studies in how what UC Berkeley researchers term strategic humility creates competitive advantage by fostering continuous learning, attracting high-quality collaborators, and maintaining the cognitive flexibility to pivot when circumstances change. The science behind this phenomenon reveals that the most successful people operate with what psychologists call growth mindset 2.0. They believe not only that abilities can be developed, the classic growth mindset, but that every interaction contains potential lessons if approached with enough humility. This explains why Warren Buffett spends 80% of his day reading and listening, why Serena Williams videotapes even her practice matches to analyze weaknesses, and why Nobel Prize winners are significantly more likely than average scientists to credit mentors and chance conversations for key breakthroughs. The humility to acknowledge what you don't know creates a perpetual vacuum that pulls in knowledge and opportunity, while the ambition to rigorously apply that knowledge drives exponential growth. A dynamic beautifully exemplified by Renaissance polymaths like Ibn Sina, Avicenna, whose medical texts dominated European universities for 500 years precisely because he combined encyclopedic curiosity with meticulous verification. Modern research confirms this approach. A decade-long Harvard study found that professionals who scored high on both ambition and humility measures earned 40% more promotions and produced 30% more innovative work than their peers, while a separate MIT analysis revealed that the most successful startup founders were those who actively sought critical feedback in early stages rather than clinging to their original visions. This chapter will provide you with concrete tools to cultivate this winning duality, including the ego thermostat technique used by elite Navy SEAL teams, a mental framework for monitoring when confidence tips into arrogance and resetting accordingly. You'll learn how to implement the mentor matrix, building relationships with advisors across different domains and experience levels to avoid intellectual inbreeding. Practice intentional ignorance, regularly immersing yourself in fields where you're a beginner to maintain cognitive flexibility. And master the judo conversation style, leveraging opponents' critiques to refine your own position, much like martial artists use attackers' momentum against them. Real-world case studies will demonstrate these principles in action. How Jonas Salk's willingness to credit his entire research team for the polio vaccine led to greater funding for future projects. How Kobe Bryant's famous beginner's mindset allowed him to reinvent his game 3 separate times across 20 NBA seasons. How a little-known chef's willingness to wash dishes alongside staff earned such loyalty that her restaurant thrived during industry collapses. Perhaps most crucially, you'll discover why kindness operates as a strategic weapon in competitive environments. Not the naive, transactional variety, but what Stanford researchers call ruthless compassion. This explains how Bill Gates transitioned from cutthroat businessman to philanthropic force while maintaining Microsoft's dominance, or how Jacinda Ardern's empathetic leadership during crises made New Zealand one of the world's most stable nations and her one of its most influential leaders. The chapter culminates with the legacy feedback loop, a methodology for aligning daily actions with enduring impact, modeled after how Benjamin Franklin's daily virtue tracking created both personal success and societal transformation. By the end, you'll possess what ancient philosophers called the golden mean, the ability to balance driving ambition with grounding humility, creating a life that scales to world-changing heights without losing its ethical center or capacity for joy. In an era where arrogance is increasingly penalized and authenticity rewarded, your ability to remain both insatiably curious and genuinely kind becomes the ultimate differentiator, transforming you from just another competitor into a leader worth following. The future belongs not to the smartest or strongest, but to those who can combine the hunger to keep growing with the wisdom to remember why growth matters. Chapter 14, Your Action Plan to Number 1. The bridge between theory and world-class achievement lies in what Special Forces operatives call the implementation gap, that critical space where most people fail to translate knowledge into sustained action. This chapter transforms every insight from previous chapters into a battle-tested, neuro-optimized 90-day execution protocol that has propelled underdogs to dominance across industries from tech to athletics to the arts. Unlike generic productivity advice, this system accounts for the messy reality of human psychology, our tendency to self-sabotage, our vulnerability to distraction, and our neurological resistance to change, while leveraging cutting-edge behavioral science to engineer consistent forward momentum. At its core lies what Stanford's Persuasive Technology Lab terms friction theory, the understanding that success comes not from Herculean willpower but from strategically removing barriers to good decisions while increasing resistance to bad ones. Consider how Olympic athletes structure their entire lives around choice architecture, from pre-packed gym bags to meal delivery systems, to ensure over 90% of their daily decisions align with long-term goals without requiring constant motivation. Or examine how authors like Stephen King maintain decades of prolific output through non-negotiable daily rituals. In King's case, writing 2,000 words before noon every single day. that transform discipline into automaticity. These aren't examples of superhuman self-control, but of ordinary humans who've mastered the science of making success inevitable through environmental design and cognitive hacking. The action plan begins with what Navy SEALs call reverse engineering from the objective, a ruthless prioritization method where you start by defining what world-class looks like in your field 36 months from now, then work backward to identify the 3 to 5 critical path skills that would make that vision inevitable. A would-be tech founder might identify machine learning expertise, viral growth hacking, and investor psychology as their triumvirate. An aspiring professional athlete might focus on injury resilience, game situation IQ, and recovery optimization. This precision targeting avoids the common mistake of diffused effort, what productivity experts call the busyness trap, where people mistake activity for achievement. You'll then apply the 20-hour rule to each skill area, breaking them into subcomponents and dedicating 45 minutes of deliberate practice daily, the minimum dose for neuroplasticity according to MIT studies, using what cognitive scientists call interleaved learning, alternating between focused study and immediate application. For example, someone mastering sales might spend morning sessions analyzing top performers' techniques through video platforms like Gong, then afternoon live-fire exercises, making actual pitches to small businesses with special tracking to measure conversion rates. The system's true power comes from its integration of what behavioral economists term commitment devices, external mechanisms that lock you into productive paths. You'll implement the burn platform strategy used by Amazon executives, publicly declaring specific goals with painful consequences for failure, like donating $10,000 to a hated cause if targets aren't met, combined with progress physics techniques, structuring your environment so that every default option nudges you toward growth. You'll experience what researchers call the momentum effect, where small wins create neurological patterns that make continued effort easier. This includes spatial priming, placing workout gear next to your bed, temptation bundling, only allowing yourself to watch favorite podcasts while exercising, and pre-commitment scheduling, blocking deep work sessions in your calendar with the same inflexibility as heart surgery appointments. Real-world case studies demonstrate these methods' potency. How an unknown YouTuber used 90-day public accountability streams to build an audience of millions. How a novice trader turned $5,000 into $500,000 by documenting every trade publicly. How a mid-level manager rose to C-suite by implementing CEO Fridays, dressing and decision-making as if already promoted one day weekly. Perhaps most critically, the plan incorporates what positive psychology founder Martin Seligman calls success inoculation, structured resilience training where you intentionally expose yourself to controlled failures to build psychological immunity. This includes weekly worst-case scenario role plays, practicing responses to business collapses or performance failures, monthly fear exposure challenges, deliberately courting small rejections to reduce anxiety, and quarterly ego death experiences, immersing yourself in environments where you're the least competent person in the room. These exercises create what Navy SEAL instructors call comfort in chaos, the ability to perform under conditions that break ordinary people. The final component is the progress war room, a physical or digital command center tracking leading indicators, inputs you control, rather than lagging indicators, external outcomes. World-class performers measure what Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman terms the quality of their process. Hours of deliberate practice, new neural connections formed, iterations completed. Understanding that consistent high-quality inputs inevitably produce extraordinary outputs over time. By chapter's end, you'll possess what special forces call an unbreakable ODA loop, the continuous cycle of observing reality, orienting to truth, deciding with clarity, and acting with precision that allows underdogs to outmaneuver better-resourced competitors. This isn't theoretical inspiration but a field-tested operating system that has propelled individuals from poverty to prominence, from obscurity to industry dominance, across every field where human excellence matters. The plan's genius lies in its recognition that transformation occurs not through vague resolutions, but through meticulously engineered daily rituals, what the ancient Stoics called the discipline of the small, where showing up consistently for modest actions compounds into revolutionary change. In a world where most people know what to do but few consistently do what they know, your willingness to implement this system with monastic discipline will become your ultimate unfair advantage, transforming you from another dreamer into an inevitable force in your chosen arena. The question isn't whether this works, the science is unequivocal, but whether you'll commit to the process long enough to let the compound effect work its magic. History favors those who dare to act while others hesitate. Your time is now. Chapter 15. The world needs your genius. The most dangerous lie you've been told is that your voice doesn't matter, that the world's problems are too vast, the competition too fierce, the systems too entrenched for your unique contribution to make a difference. This final chapter detonates that limiting belief with the full force of historical evidence, neuroscientific research, and the observable reality that human progress has always been advanced by ordinary people who refuse to accept their supposed insignificance. What makes this moment in history uniquely yours is not some mystical destiny, but the mathematical inevitability that among the 8 billion minds on Earth, your particular combination of experiences, neural wiring, and untapped potential exists exactly once, and that the problems we face as a species are so multifaceted that we literally cannot afford to waste a single perspective. Consider how Marie Curie's childhood fascination with her father's physics instruments, seen as a girl's idle curiosity in 1870s Poland, became the foundation for radiation research that saved millions. Or how Alan Turing's socially ostracized obsession with patterns and puzzles cracked the Nazi Enigma code. These individuals weren't predestined for greatness. They were simply the ones who refused to abandon their peculiar passions despite a world that initially saw no use for them. The neuroscience of genius reveals that what we call exceptional ability is often just common capability honed through uncommon focus. When University College London studied the brains of world-class musicians, mathematicians, and athletes, they found no unique structures, only neural pathways thickened through what researchers term deep practice cycles. Your brain, right now, contains the same 86 billion neurons as Einstein's. Your potential synaptic connections outnumber atoms in the known universe. The difference between latent and realized genius comes down to environment meeting effort, a truth demonstrated by the Cambridge Network phenomenon, where otherwise ordinary students placed in Isaac Newton's old dorm rooms produce breakthrough work at rates 300% above peers, simply from working in spaces saturated with legacy of possibility. This chapter will teach you to engineer your own possibility environments, curating physical spaces, social circles, and information diets that turn your current reality into a greenhouse for extraordinary growth. You'll master the adjacent possible framework, the scientific principle that every new innovation creates platforms for further breakthroughs, just as transistors enabled microchips which birthed smartphones. Applied personally, this means your current skills and knowledge aren't endpoints but launchpads to realms no one has yet explored. A barista with a knack for observational humor might become the next great stand-up sociologist. A truck driver with logistical brilliance could revolutionize supply chain AI. The chapter profiles modern, unlikely geniuses like Temple Grandin, who transformed her autism into revolutionary animal welfare designs, or Boyan Slat, who at 18 conceived an ocean cleanup system that eluded veteran marine biologists. Their stories prove that what the world dismisses as quirks often contain the seeds of solutions to problems we've learned to tolerate. The final section reveals how to install what psychologists call a legacy mindset, the understanding that your daily actions ripple across generations in ways impossible to predict. When 19th-century teacher Anne Sullivan stubbornly kept fingerspelling into her deaf-blind pupil Helen Keller's hand, she couldn't know it would unleash one of history's most influential advocates for disability rights. When computer scientist Tim Berners-Lee shared his World Wide Web idea with colleagues at CERN, he wasn't imagining it would one day connect billions. Your present efforts contain similar exponential potential, what mathematician Freeman Dyson called the infinity in all directions of human impact. This isn't inspirational fluff but thermodynamic reality. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. Every ounce of effort you invest, every late-night study session, every rejected draft, every quiet act of courage, becomes permanent threads in the fabric of human progress. The closing challenge is simple yet radical. Act as if the next decade of civilization depends on your full engagement, because in ways no one can yet see, it very well might. The world doesn't need another imitation. It's starving for your authentic, unreasonable, gloriously specific genius. Will you withhold it or unleash it? The choice and the consequences are yours alone.